So good evening again, and thanks for coming, for joining us today, for your time, to our guests and to our distinguished speakers. I think timing is very unfortunately good for this discussion because developments are taking place at the moment. And recently, a few days ago, Armenian government, Prime Minister Pashinyan accused Azerbaijan in crossing Armenian border, and Armenian government called on Russia to react, to take some actions to defend the Armenian border and territorial integrity. So if a month ago we discussed some kind of discussions, negotiations, some working groups on the ground, trying to open communications between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and etc. Now, again, unfortunately, we discuss the conflict. Our distinguished speakers today from Armenia is Mr. Richard Gerakasyan, Director of the Regional Studies Center, Ambassador Farid Shafiev, Director of the Center of Analysis of International Relations, General Ben Hodges, Pershing Chair at CEPA, and Tom Deval, Senior Fellow at Carnegie Europe. Thank you again, and we will start with opening remarks from our regional representatives, Mr. Richard Gerakasyan and Ambassador Farid Shafiev, just to have a better understanding of what's going on and why, again, we're talking about some military actions, about some accusations, and etc. Please, Mr. Richard Gerakasyan, could you please briefly evaluate what's going on, why the situation became tense again, and which threats do you see at the moment? Do you really see some military threats? Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and it's a pleasure to provide an update or a new assessment on the most recent developments. On the one hand, the war for Nagorno-Karabakh, 44 days of fairly intense fighting, ended with the imposition of a Russian-crafted ceasefire back in November 2020. However, in recent days, there's been an escalation both in terms of prolonged and lingering disputes over the border delineation. What this reveals is the difficulty in adjusting to the post-war reality. And in many ways, we saw reports from the Armenian side of a considerable incursion by the Azerbaijani armed forces into Armenian territory. This is significant in terms of widening the conflict well beyond Nagorno-Karabakh and challenging and testing both the Armenian and the Russian response. Having said that, in many ways, there is good news. There is preparations on a new agreement, a tripartite Russian-Armenian-Azerbaijani agreement to create a working group, if you will, a commission, specifically empowered and tasked with an assignment for border demarcation. This is significant for two particular reasons as a de-escalation. First is it allows an institutional legal mechanism for addressing the necessity for a negotiated border demarcation. Secondly, it follows and replicates the one area of progress in the post-war diplomatic arena. It is the existing working group between the three countries calling for the restoration of trade and transport. This is a rare display of diplomatic engagement. But in general, there are two conclusions. The first is we are still facing a lingering state of war, given the more important issue, the more pressing, urgent issue for Armenia, the return of all prisoners of war and civilian hostages from Azerbaijani captivity as a requirement of the ceasefire agreement. Secondly, what we also see is the need to return to diplomacy, the necessity and the imperative for the OSCE Minsk Group mediators, the US, Russia, and France as co-chairs, to re-engage in the region. There is, unfortunately, a dangerous precedent of a military solution to a political conflict that shouldn't stand unchallenged. And we do need ever more to return to diplomacy, as recent events have reiterated or demonstrated.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your briefing. Ambassador Shafiev, please, your opening remarks. Could you please explain what Azerbaijan is doing or is not doing according to your position, your understanding of the process? And recently, I talked to some Azerbaijani experts during public conversations. That's why I can ask this as well. I'm interested whether such kind of actions, if you agree that they're taking place, are serving as some kind of pressure on Armenia to solve other issues, other problems. Please.
Okay, well, thank you very much again, Igor, for organizing, and I also would like to greet all participants and speakers. Okay, I'll try to be brief in 7 minutes. First of all, point number one, of course, the Azerbaijan does not see this adjustment of the positions as an encroachment on the Armenian territory. We refer to some Soviet era maps, which shows that the part of that Garagöl, or in Armenian Sev Lake, if I'm not mistaken. So 30% at least belong to Azerbaijan. But I think the problem emanates from the fact that for the 27 years, Armenia occupied a big chunk of Azerbaijani territory, and they lost the sense of border. So we are not ready to see. This is something new for them to see Azerbaijani border guards, the border forces at the border, which de jure existed even during occupation. The second, it's about the necessity indeed to conduct delimitation between two countries, and for that reason, for that purpose, both countries should mutually recognize territorial integrity of each other. And for that, we have a problem because Armenian the government continue to speak about the right for cessation of Armenians in Karabakh from Azerbaijan. And there is also, when we're speaking about the delimitation, there are problem, and it is a serious problem. 7 villages currently in Kazakh region is under Armenian occupation, and 1 village, settlement in Kerki in Nakhchivan is also under Armenian occupation. So if we're speaking about some kind of 1 kilometer square here around Garagöl, we have a huge, at least eight settlements under Armenian occupation. And another problem, I think, and here maybe Richard has better optic. I think this latest crisis caused internally by some forces who would like to oust Pashinyan from power, and because the movement of Azerbaijani forces along the borderline was previously also, since we liberated our territories. But this time it caused kind of more noise, and I believe it's in the pre-election situation. And my sense, again, I'm not in Armenia, but my sense that overall the Minister of Defense, and we know that standoff between Prime Minister and Minister of Defense previously because of the Iskander missile crisis, but they were against the government, and the security forces, if I'm not mistaken, Pashinyan has changed 4 heads of the security agency in Armenia. So that's the reason, I think, also why this particular tension around the Garagöl. Yes, you mentioned, Igor, about frustration. Azerbaijan is a bit frustrated because there is no progress on transportation links, on corridor issues, while Azerbaijan actually provided Armenians with the Goris-Kafan road. The messages which coming from Armenian side, they are, because according to the trilateral agreement, not agreement but declaration on November 10th, all communications lines should be open. And the Article 9 specifically provide about the corridor to Nakhchivan, but the work of the Trilateral Commission, Russian, Azerbaijani, and Armenians stalled, especially lately. And I also would like to emphasize the Azerbaijan made some goodwill gestures. It allowed for 10 days more to vacate Kalbajar. It, as I said, it's provided the road Goris Kafan, 1,600 bodies were handled to hand it to Armenia, while we still 4,000 people missing from the First Karabakh War. As far as the future, again, very shortly, because I have only 2 minutes, I think the only solution of the future and what actually the future engagement of Minsk Group should be, it's the security architecture of the region, South Caucasus, and that security architecture should be based on territorial integrity of all three countries of the region. And here, in this case, we speak particularly about Armenia and Azerbaijan, because we unfortunately see that attempts of the Minsk Group, and especially France, to revive the issue which lead nowhere, because Azerbaijan, we showed that manifested for 27 years. We have not reconciled with the occupation. We won't reconcile with any attempt to take our territory, piece of our territory. And overall, I think the final solution, besides the territorial integrity, it's the rights of Armenians to live in Azerbaijan and also the rights of Azerbaijanis to return in Armenia and live in Armenia. Because unfortunately, so far, I haven't heard much about that. It's only about one way, what will be the fate of Armenians in Azerbaijan, the cultural heritage. But cultural heritage of Azerbaijan is also existed in Armenia, and also the right to return. And my final point, that the continuation of this tension, it serves only the interest of external powers. And sooner we understand that both in Armenia and Azerbaijan, it will be better for the both people. Thank you.
Just a brief question, both to Ambassador Shafeev and then to Richard, very brief. Can we wait, should we wait, or is it possible to see a new wave of military confrontation on the border in Karabakh or anywhere between Armenia and Azerbaijan in upcoming days or months? Please, Ambassador, could you please answer? Ambassador Shafeev, please.
Yeah, just to me? Okay, well, I don't think so. I don't think so, because already we see that we have the document on the table. The Pashinyan is going to make some official statement. There's some documents circulated internet. Unfortunately, I cannot confirm whether it's the official or not. So I don't think, and it's very unlikely, unless again in pre-election situation before the election day in Armenia, again, the security forces will decide to use it against Pashinyan.
Thanks a lot for your reply. The same, please, briefly, Richard. Could you please answer also?
I'm a little more concerned. I'm specifically concerned about the risk of a war by accident. In other words, based on threat misperception and miscalculation by either side. And without a return to diplomacy, that risk continues to loom large. Having said that, Armenia is facing its second free and fair election, with all expectations, in the coming month. And I do hope that the rare degree of legitimacy from the institutional democracy of Armenia will actually contribute to a new environment, more conducive to diplomacy and much less likely to resort to the use of force.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, so today we have this, actually yesterday, Russia suggested that it could play some role in demarcation between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And I won't think about my question because I see the question from Ambassador Kelly. It is the same that I wanted to ask, so I will just read it. Russian offered to help with demarcation concerning and should urge Yerevan and Baku to have international process. So the question is, Richard just said that Russia is making this new agreement, and in November we have agreement with Russia, and in January we have agreement with Russia. There is no Minsk group. It just doesn't exist from my point of view. Now, we don't see United States, we don't see European Union. What we saw at the call by Mr. Sullivan, National Security Advisor, American to both to President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan. So please, General Hodges, do you see any role for Minsk Group for United States in conflict resolution, in helping Armenia and Azerbaijan solve their issues, in peace building finally, please?
Igor, thank you. Well, first of all, let me say, I cannot imagine a worse outcome than having the Kremlin be involved in solving this. Maybe the only thing that would be worse would be a resumption of violence between Armenia and Azerbaijan. After that, the worst thing is the Kremlin being responsible or leading negotiations to resolve the demarcation of the border. Our friend Ambassador Kelly, of course, is correct. That's why we jokingly refer to Russian peacekeepers. They show up and they keep a peace. So the United States has got to step forward and assert some leadership in this area. And I think the fact that we have Russian troops in Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia is a result of the fact that the United States, as a whole of government, has not paid adequate attention to the Black Sea region. Our relationship with Turkey is in terrible condition. We failed to pay attention and appreciate the economic importance of South Caucasus as the only east-west corridor between Europe and Eurasia. We don't have skin in the game, and frankly, neither do the Germans or the French. And so that's why we've just not paid adequate attention here. So I hope that the Biden administration will develop a strategy for the Black Sea region that includes competing in the diplomatic space and the information space and the economic space, not just in the military space. I think that's the best chance for a sustainable agreement. If we leave it to the Kremlin, then we're going to get more of the same.
General Hodges, sorry. If we go wider, can we say, I think it was Lukoff's proposal or idea about American troops going from Afghanistan to Georgia. Do you think that it could be regarding the situation with Russian troops in all three countries? Do you think it could be a way out or for stabilization and more safe and secure region? And is it possible in general?
So I am a believer in the idea that great power competition prevents great power conflict. That if you compete in the economic domain and in the diplomatic domain and in the information domain, that you are conveying to potential adversaries and rivals that you care, that we, the United States, cares, that the West cares about a region. When we don't compete, then basically that's an invitation to the Kremlin or the Chinese to fill that vacuum. And because we failed to compete in the past, that's why we are where we are now. Even though we have sent exceptional diplomats, professional diplomats like Ian Kelly to the countries, we haven't had the strategic overview and widespread congressional support for the region. So that's part of the problem. Now, Georgia. I loved Lukoff's idea. I think it's a great place to have over-the-horizon forces that could respond to a crisis in Afghanistan or elsewhere in Eurasia or in the region. I like it for two reasons. Number one, it makes sense from a practical standpoint. Obviously, there will be people that will pull their hair out. We'll see it as being provocative to the Kremlin. If we have U.S. troops that are rotational, that are on the same basis in Georgia that they are in, let's say, Lithuania or Poland. But it makes a lot of sense to me. Secondly, I am tired of always responding to what the Russians do, or everybody wringing their hands about, oh, this might provoke the Russians. Clearly, the only thing that provokes the Kremlin is weakness and indecisiveness. They may complain, but they will respect a firm hand. And so I think the idea of putting over the horizon troops, we're not talking about a lot of people, but forces that are rotational through Georgia, that kind of helps us get the initiative in the region so that we're not always responding to what the Kremlin does. Last point, I'm going to say it again, we have got to fix our relationship with Turkey. Turkey clearly is the key nation in the Black Sea region. If you take the map and put the Black Sea in the middle of the map, it changes how we think about Turkey and how we think about the Black Sea. Usually, in any Western headquarters you go into, the Black Sea is in the bottom right-hand corner. And so we fail to really appreciate the strategic geography. But if you put the map, the Black Sea in the middle of the map, it changes how people think about the region. And I hope that the administration will work hard to rebuild trust with our longtime Turkish ally.
Thanks a lot, and I will later ask you something else about Turkey as well. Mr. Thomas Deval, thank you a lot for joining us today, and could you please talk a bit, you know the conflict very well, and both sides, you know the history and every aspect of this issue. Could you please comment whether there is any role for OSCE Minsk Group? Do you agree that it failed? Unfortunately, I would say. And what could European Union or OSCE Minsk Group do now when you see that second agreement is coming out already with the Kremlin? Maybe it's not too bad, but all aspects in the region are connected only to the Kremlin.
Right. Thank you very much, Igor, and thank you for the invitation, and good to see you all. Yeah, I mean, clearly it's not a good situation we have at the moment. The best that can be said is that we don't have violence and a return to fighting. I mean, when the ceasefire was signed on November 9th, 10th, it was obviously it was a tragic conflict. About 8,000 people died, I think, by the last calculation. But at least there was a little bit of optimism that there might be a pathway to a peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. That obviously hasn't happened, and I think 6-7 months later, we're looking at a worse situation than many anticipated back then. There's the issue of the detainees, Armenian detainees in Azerbaijan. So there are still painful issues. The issue of the Armenian detainees in Azerbaijan. I see this European Parliament resolution today calling for their release. And obviously there's a demarcation issue, which is very difficult because, as we know, other post-Soviet borders were demarcated in the 1990s. That was a very painful process in many cases, but Armenia, Azerbaijan, because of the conflict between them, was never demarcated. As Ambassador Sariev has mentioned, there are the 7 villages in the Kazakh region that Armenia took over in the early 1990s, plus the Kirki enclave just north of Nakhchivan. There's also an Armenian exclave called Artsakh, which is also inside Azerbaijani territory controlled by Azerbaijan. So I think the sooner that there's a demarcation commission agreeing on where the actual border lies, the better, because this is obviously a running sore currently for Armenia, but also in a different way for Azerbaijan. The economic connectivity, which was going to be the great one of the great items of progress in this conflict, that's also stalled, I think, by the lack of political agreement. I think we can all agree that it's a good thing, but if there's no political trust, it's very difficult to open transport routes. And all you need is a group of young men by the side of the road with a bag full of stones just to throw through a few car windshields, and then your economic connectivity, unfortunately, is in a problem. And then obviously we have the long-term issue of what will it take for a political agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. What would be the status of Nagorno-Karabakh? We still see completely diametric positions. The Armenians referring to Artsakh, with a place with the right of secession. Azerbaijan currently saying that Nagorno-Karabakh as an entity no longer exists at all. So I don't think it's any surprise, really, to be honest, that the Russians are in the driving seat in this situation, for better or for worse. And it is oft as has been sketched out for worse, but also the Russians are obviously a stabilizing force in the short term. They get things done. They deliver on short-term goals. If you look at what the Russian peacekeeping force is up to in Karabakh, they're doing demining, they're doing humanitarian aid, they're assisting some reconstruction there. So they're actually welcome there. And yet the Russians are also delivering for Azerbaijan in the sense that they are controlling the Lachin corridor, that Armenian forces have withdrawn from Karabakh, and there is restricted access to Karabakh, which is an Azerbaijani demand. So the Russians are actually delivering for both sides. They are a stabilizing factor, whether we like it or not. And you know, we have to accept that we don't want to tear up that ceasefire agreement just because we have problems with the Russians in other conflict zones. A reminder that the Russian peacekeeping force here is a bit different from peacekeeping forces in other conflict zones. It's more of a classic peacekeeping force. It's there with the consent of Azerbaijan, which is obviously not the case of what we see in Moldova or in Georgia, or let alone in Ukraine. It has a 5-year window on which, obviously, I'm sure the Russians will fight very hard and use lots of persuasive arguments in Baku that they need to stay. But there is a 5-year window which does give an opportunity to review that peacekeeping force within 5 years. And one possibility, which I think is worth considering right now, is that force would stay but become a multilateral force with not just Russian involvement, with others as well. So it's worth thinking about that, I think, right now. But clearly, the Minsk group has been marginalized. France is an extremely unpopular country in Azerbaijan. One almost can't think of a more unsuitable mediator as far as Azerbaijan is concerned. That's an unfortunate reality. And the United States is still figuring out its policy. I think the central point here is that the United States and France, if it is able to engage, can only engage insofar as much as Baku and Yerevan want them to engage. It's you know, they can't engage unilaterally. So I think that means a certain reality that one has to accept. The Russians are in a central place and see what can be done in parallel or in assistance to the Russians. For me, the thing I advocated, the policy advice I advocated in the paper I wrote back for Carnegie back in February, it's called Unfinished Business in the Armenian-Azerbaijan Conflict, was that there should be an international effort to assist the massive reconstruction rehabilitation program for the deoccupied territories of Azerbaijan, to assist the return of hundreds of thousands of IDPs who thankfully are going to have the right of return there, but unfortunately have a long wait until those territories are properly habitable and economically viable. There's going to be huge sums attached to that, which I don't believe Azerbaijan is currently able to meet, or Turkey or Russia, and I think there needs to be an international effort to do that. I would like to see an international effort to do that. But I would like to see that done with a peace agenda which does not exclude the Armenians of Karabakh, which sees road connections and kind of economic interconnections between places like Kalbajar region and Armenia. I think that would be somewhere where if the Western countries could put up some money, I think that should be a welcome assistance package. Unfortunately, there were some negotiations around that back in December, January, but it got bogged down over issues of access, issues about which organizations should be allowed into the territories, which UN organizations should be allowed in. My hope is that maybe the situation will stabilize a little after the Armenian elections. It will be possible to have another try at that kind of initiative. But to be honest, I don't see much for the Minsk group to do at the moment, but so I think it's better for the Western countries to re-engage in different sectors and different activities, and that would seem to me the most obvious one place to engage. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Understood. And yeah, actually, you just said about that. Yes, Russia is doing that and this, and I would like to ask Richard Gurkasan, how do you see this role? So today we're talking about some new agreement between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia. How do you see this role? And especially before upcoming elections, I heard that even the biggest opposition party of Gagik Tsarukyan, very rich person in Armenia, they're saying about further integration with Russia. I don't understand personally what does it mean, because we know that border guards in Armenia are Russian, and etc., etc. and it's an Armenian choice. It's not a problem. I'm just saying that I can't understand what does it mean to be more integrated. Could you please first explain what does it mean to be more integrated with Russia for Armenia? And then how do you see this role? So many agreements with Russian army on your territory and etc. Is it fine, and do you need the Western role there?
Well, a difficult question, but to be concise, don't be distracted by the opposition's rather flagrant narratives. It's an abuse of reality because they are largely discredited. What we see, however, let's be honest, the net impact, assessing the outcome of the war for Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia is now ever firmly locked within a Russian orbit, resisting the gravitational pull of Russia. At the same time, the first most important casualty in the war was the demise of Armenia's myth of invincibility. And in many ways, Armenia has yet to adapt to the new reality. The Armenian government is still in a state of denial, evidenced by the lack of a diplomatic strategy, questions over the future of military reform. And again, whether we like it or not, the security and safety of the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh are now much more dependent on the Russian peacekeepers and no longer dependent on Armenia. And to be honest, many in Nagorno-Karabakh are looking to Moscow, not Yerevan. And there is a real potential of a scenario of Abkhazia, where Nagorno-Karabakh seeks to become a Russian protectorate or a Russian garrison state in the region, which would be bad for everyone. Having said that, I'm a little optimistic over the longer term. Armenia's investment in institutional democracy, a rare victory of nonviolence in 2018, ushered in a new democracy in the region. And we've gone too far to go back. At the same time, our ties with the West, both with the European Union, with the SEPA agreement, but also long-standing deep ties to the United States, are also giving Armenia greater room to maneuver and flexibility, despite the risk of overdependence on Russia. Having said that, I do think the only promising area is the restoration of trade and transport, if it's a bigger package. Normalization with Turkey, where Turkey reopens the border, and the restoration of all road and rail, not only Azerbaijan-Nakhichevan. But I'm also more worried about the outlook for Azerbaijan in terms of no longer having the conflict as an excuse for shortcomings in democracy or entrenched corruption. And Azerbaijan is a country where the father and son have ruled the country for more than a quarter of a century. I do think the missing ingredient here is legitimacy, democracy, free and fair elections. Until then, we're going to be challenged. Having said that, I do think the cost of the war was much higher than many expected, meaning that the temptation for revenge or retribution on any side hopefully will be much less. And it's up to us in civil society to challenge the narrative and to pressure and demand for delivering to the people stability and peace. And for the US, I am encouraged as a Democrat that the Biden administration is correcting the policy impulsiveness of the Trump years and can be engaged in strategic re-engagement with a US national interest of post-war stability.
Could you please just briefly specify what does it mean to be more integrated with Russia? What Armenian politicians are now saying, and there are lots of them.
No. I mean, let's be honest. You're taking a off-the-cuff statement by one marginal opposition leader who is seeking Russian support to challenge the government. But I don't take him or former President Kocharyan seriously. According to recent polls by the International Republican Institute, they're going to be challenged to pass the minimum threshold. And it's not so much popularity of Pashinyan or the Armenian government, but the largely discredited nature of the opposition, which is linked to the former corrupt governments of Armenia. But we are in President Putin's prison of the Eurasian Economic Union and the Collective Security Treaty Organization. And to be quite honest, Prime Minister Pashinyan is now very much a trophy on President Putin's shelf in terms of overly submissive and subordinate, given the reality of the post-war situation.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, this is an answer to this question. I agree with you. Ambassador Shafeev, could you please, of course, you have your own remarks, but could you please also tell me, like, do Azerbaijan need any Western format to be engaged now, or this only Russia's involvement is enough for Azerbaijan? And secondly, these peacekeepers, I will agree with General Van Hodges about their very peacekeeping mission. And do Azerbaijan think or consider, as a Turkish colleague on previous conference, he mentioned that no one believed that Russian peacekeepers will ever leave Karabakh. So do Azerbaijan consider it as some kind of threat that near Shusha or other regions there is so many Russian soldiers, foreign soldiers?
Well, first of all, there's on 2,000 Russian peacekeepers. If we look at the area which we're controlling, temporarily controlling, it's not a big amount. And somebody would like to make the parallels. There might be some parallels with Ossetia or Abkhazia, but I think this is completely different situation because we are inside Azerbaijan. But overall, the flavor of this discussion is kind of, we invited Russians. No, we have not invited Russians. Russia has military base in Armenia. Russia is the 30 years the military ally of Armenia. Russia supplied all kind of weapons to Armenia, including the Iskander missiles, not even the export version, but the version which is indeed using the Russian militaries, and that was used against Azerbaijan. So I think we need to bring the full picture, who was interested in Russian forces in the South Caucasus, and the only country I think it is Armenia. And with regard to the Western the engagement, I think already Tom DeWaal said about the France fully discredited. As look at the latest, the tweet, or what tweet was, or the Facebook post by the French president in Armenian. So France is on Armenian side. Well, United States, more or less. I mean, if we look at our bilateral cooperation, especially in 90s, United States supported many Azerbaijan initiatives, the energy projects. But again, with Biden administration, we remember that before elections, they made pro-Armenian statements. So if somebody telling me this is done because of the elections, I mean, we in Azerbaijan, whether it's election in United States or elsewhere in France, we see that, what the Western powers will bring to Azerbaijan. Is it the better solution to the Russian influence? I don't think so in current circumstances. Turkey is completely different case for us. And I think generally Turkey is important balancing power to Russian influence in the South Caucasus. I just would like to make one remark about democracy. There is kind of now contrast comparison, and I have really a philosophical disagreement, not just simple disagreement, because philosophically I would like to highlight, because I don't think Armenia is a democracy, because no Armenian politician so far spoke about the right of Azerbaijanis to return to Armenia. If we accept that for example, America is democracy because they provide rights to white people, then of course fine. Armenia is also democracy because it's provide democracy to Armenians, ethnic Armenians. But that's not democracy. And why I'm telling the philosophical, I don't think even the ancient Greece is democracy. You can find that in the textbooks. I think the Turkic nomadic tribes or Indian nomadic tribes in the North America had better democracy than Greece, with the share of the slaves without any rights. So as far as the internal process in Azerbaijan, the question was how the situation with the corruption and with the political institutions, now the conflict went into history. But we still have the problem. We still have the Russian peacekeeping forces. We still have the pressure on Azerbaijan. And I'll tell you, the current president enjoys the quite support among the public, among the masses. And the important fact to remember that last year in July, it was the public who staged the demonstration against the government, demanding decisive actions against Armenia. So as long as all issues is not resolved, we don't have peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I think for people of Azerbaijan, I think that this issue will be number one rather than some other issues, though there are some legitimate concerns about some internal development. But also, I know some people might not, I mean, they won't agree with me, but Azerbaijan made some improvement in recent decade.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And to our distinguished guests, if you have some questions, please raise your hands. And now I would like to ask something. General Hodges said briefly about Turkey, and Ambassador Shafiev just mentioned Turkey. My question to General Hodges will be on our latest session where Dr. Mithat Salikpala from Turkey was taking part. He said that we are competing with the Kremlin in South Caucasus. And we would like, and it is like depend a lot how we will do it in the region, and it depends on the US policy towards Turkey as well. So as I understood his statements, it was like we should talk to European Union and United States and discuss together how we will balance together in South Caucasus Kremlin's influence. Do you agree that United States should reconsider approach towards Turkey and maybe act more actively together in countering malign influence, as it is called?
So, you know, when I look at the map, I'm always reminded that in 1,000 years, the geography is not going to change. And that strategy is about the map and it's about interest. It cannot be based on emotion. It cannot be based on, okay, we're not happy with perhaps President Erdogan right now. And so I worry that some in the Congress will, because they're so frustrated with the Erdogan administration, will make decisions that have long-term ramifications, particularly among young Turkish professionals. They see the United States as a nation that's not an ally, but somebody that constantly is critical of Turkey. So thinking strategically, looking at the map, making sure that we have a long-term view of this relationship. Now, look, Igor, I think you know, I had the great privilege to live in Izmir for 2 years when I was the commander of NATO Allied Land Command from 2012 to 2014. I loved it. I mean, I love Turkey. It's an incredible history, the culture, a great ally, but also maddening. I mean, so frustrating that our Turkish friends are spring-loaded to be offended at the drop of a hat. And so to think strategically, you have to grit your teeth sometimes on certain things and keep focused on the greater objective. And the greater objective is Turkey as a NATO ally, and it's been a very good ally since 1952, no matter who was in power. very reliable in many ways. That we need Turkey. The alliance is much better with Turkey than without Turkey, no matter how frustrating it may be sometimes. Now, I do not excuse some bad decisions. This S-400 is a bad decision for Turkey. It's a complete fairy tale that comes out of Ankara about the U.S. would not sell Patriot. That is completely false. I was in Izmir for 2 years. Of course, we wanted Turkey to have Patriot, but we're not willing to give up all the intellectual property that goes with it. We don't do that with Germany or the Netherlands or Spain or Greece either. Turkey, of course, is working hard to develop its own defense industry, and they wanted all of the intellectual property for Patriot. No, of course not. So for the Turkish government, our allies, to say, well, we had no choice, we had to get S-400 because the Americans would not sell Patriot, that's flat out false. Now, the relationship between two allies should not be defined by this one issue. And I think I think most Turks know that their better future, their prosperity lies with the West. And we've got to figure out how do we protect this relationship and not lose a whole generation of young people as well.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I would like to ask Thomas Deval, and please be a bit louder if possible, because there's something with connection. And then I will ask the same, actually, with more maybe specific details from Richard and Mr. Farid Shafif. How do you see from outside? They just started, both sides, together with Russia, just started these working groups and opening communications. You said about this trading importance and etc., etc. But again and again, we see some barricades on this way. From outside, what will be your vision of how to move forward from it and build something new, maybe, and not stop again and again with some problems? Please, Thomas Deval.
Thank you, Igor, and just let me know that you can hear me okay. I mean, clearly, I think this is obviously one of the positives from this, potential positives from the outcome of this conflict, is the restoration of trade communications, reconnecting mainland Azerbaijan, if you want to call it that, with Nakhchivan, potentially opening routes to Turkey, and you know this, and also connecting Armenia to Turkey potentially, and to Russia. But you know, let's be clear that economic connections need some kind of political trust to underpin them. They don't just happen by themselves. And I think this is where some work needs to go. That you can't just impose economic connections and the trade will flow. I'm also concerned that there is a kind of attempt here to kind of bypass Georgia. And I hope that you know, Georgia's Western friends and Georgia itself can step up, and Georgia can, you know, remain for how it is, which, you know, means perhaps Georgia taking another good look at the Anaklia project and how to finance that properly after repeated failures to do that. I think there's still, unfortunately, a rhetorical war going on between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and we've seen some missteps. I think certainly, you know, for example, this trophy park in Baku is a misstep. It is, you know, whatever was intended, it certainly is familiar to Armenians. The kind of the way that Armenians are portrayed in that. That's an unfortunate development. I would hope that gradually the rhetorical war can be de-escalated, and Armenia and Azerbaijan can start talking to one another, because, you know, there are people who want to talk to one another, particularly I guess the business community really wants to talk to one another. But that's, you know, without a minimum of political agreement, I think that's going to be very difficult. And again, I think the Russians clearly have an agenda to open up communication routes, but it's to open them up to their own agenda. So I think it's for Western actors to come in and look at, you know, connecting Georgia at offering money for their own reconstruction projects. So it's kind of a challenge, I think, to Western actors to see how they can get involved.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Actually, the same question to Richard Georgesyan, but with more details. And please, like, not just saying that, yes, we should, but like, what is the roadmap? How we should? Because now we see accusations about crossing the border. Yesterday, something else. Tomorrow, something else. Stopping from this process. Do you think that it should be started? And how can we do it without like stopping every day? Please, Richard Georgesyan.
Well, to follow Tom's point of reference here, what's interesting is what's new, and it's the economic incentive. For decades in this region and in this conflict, the promise of economics and trade were simply not acknowledged and didn't have any real weight. That's changed in terms of addressing Armenia's isolation, as well as all countries sharing a challenge of economic recovery from the pandemic. There is new impetus and incentive of economics and trade that was missing before. This is also why normalization between Armenia and Turkey will be not only beneficial, but essential. But I do want to also reiterate a second point that Tom made. We haven't talked about Georgia enough, because Georgia, unfortunately, is being marginalized in this Russian plan for the restoration of trade and transport, as well as the Russian military deployment unilaterally. We have to better bring back Georgia into the region, and we have to pay greater strategic attention and investment, if you will, in terms of Georgia's role also as a potential broker and partner for both sides. But nevertheless, the real missing ingredient is a return to normalcy. And this is only through the resumption of diplomatic engagement and negotiations. Moreover, from the Armenian perspective, it's very difficult to move on and to move beyond the state of war so long as the prisoners and civilian hostages remain in Azerbaijani captivity. Armenia has returned all the prisoners. We don't hold any. We don't have any bargaining chips. And I think until the prisoner return is fully accomplished, only then can we expect to turn the page and move on. But nevertheless, I do think Azerbaijan also will garner greater diplomatic dividends from a return to normalcy and a resumption of diplomacy.
Do you believe, sorry for one more little question, do you believe it's possible in upcoming weeks or months, or it will be stopped by political intrigues or some steps and etc.? Going to normalcy.
Clearly, as someone who moved here 17 years ago from the United States, having served in Washington, I think it's realistically a combination of both. Political intrigue, certainly. Primitive posturing, definitely. But also a degree of statesmanship and political will. And unfortunately, it took a war for us to get to this stage in terms of greater sincerity in negotiations. So I think it's going to be both, honestly. But at the same time, from the Armenian perspective, we don't choose our neighbors, and we need to adjust to this new reality. And to be quite honest, to be more as a contributor, I do know that Prime Minister Pashinyan of Armenia is about to announce the return of 6 or 7 of those contested villages along the border with Azerbaijan that the ambassador has mentioned. So there are more than gestures of goodwill, there are serious concessions. How Pashinyan is doing this, not sharing information with the public or preparing the public, I disagree with. Nevertheless, there are more signs of progress lately, despite the tension and skirmishes.
Thanks a lot, Ambassador Shafir. Please, your remarks on like how to move forward with maybe some specific details if you have some.
Just please drop ambassador. It's too formal. Farid, that's it. I agree on economic prospects because that's how actually we look at the Europe after the Second World War. We started, the European Union began with the small group of countries, Benelux and France, with the coal and steel agreement. So we definitely, that might be the road to reconciliation between two peoples, but I think it's still the long road because we see that the Armenian the government currently, they even put the sanctions on Turkish products. As far as the sort of I just would like to mention that, you know, track 2, this is very good. Track 2, I mean, intellectuals like me or like Richard or some, we can meet, we can talk, we have some sort of the education, and we can partly agree on something, but we should think about the larger audience. And I'm coming back to what I mentioned about European experience. Without the security architecture, without territorial integrity of all three countries, we also should put the Georgia into the picture. We won't move on track 2 because track 2 failed even before Second Karabakh War, and now whom we have? I mean, on the Armenian side, we have Vanyan, Georgi, and a couple of people on this side too. I mean, there are some, you know, the activists. That's it. I mean, we should speak about the larger audience. We should speak about the larger movement towards reconciliation. Just the point about Armenian detainees, the position of Azerbaijan, we don't have any prisoners, whereas detainees caught after the November 10th. And I believe their return to Armenia is on the negotiation table. There are some other issues which concerns us. First of all, the landmines and some other items. So if we'll come to some agreement, of course, that will serve, I mean, it will be, the element will ease tension. But I don't believe that we have now at this stage this tension just because we have the Armenian detainees on our side. There is much larger the set of problems.
Thanks a lot. And my last question, actually, because we're almost out of time, to General Ben-Hodges will be, and it's very important for me from Georgia, and to inform our guests and our audience that this very good, maybe for Armenia and Azerbaijan, potential opening of communications and etc. Is or could be an issue, one more issue for Georgia, because as I know, according to many sources in the Kremlin, there is a strategy to, in parallel with opening these communications between Armenia, Russia, Azerbaijan, and etc., to push Georgia to open the road through occupied Abkhazia. And now this pushing is in the process. So, General Hodges, how do you see this opening of communications controlled by the Kremlin? And actually, there is a format that is very widely discussed, 3+3, where Russia, Iran, Turkey, Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. How would you evaluate these formats and such kind of role in the region?
Well, at the risk of never getting invited to anything again, any arrangement where the Kremlin has a critical role of organizing the outcome of anything is a poison pill as far as I'm concerned, unless the United States is there in a serious, sustained way to ensure transparency and compliance. I mean, I think about our Georgian friends, 13 years after the so-called Sarkozy peace agreement was signed, you still have Russian troops occupying 20% of Georgia. They just recently, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs just last week was celebrating the 3rd anniversary of this wonderful big bridge over Kerch Strait. I mean, they don't even try to hide or be clever anymore. They openly brag about what they've done. This big bridge is part of their illegal occupation and annexation of Crimea. 35 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed since the start of the new year during a ceasefire to which they were part of it. The Kremlin was a part of it. So I think Bismarck said that no treaty with Russia is worth the paper it's written on. That doesn't mean you shouldn't talk with them. That doesn't mean we shouldn't negotiate. But you have to do it from a position of strength. There has to be transparency. There has to be compliance protocol. I'm sorry to be such a naysayer, but I just have zero confidence in anything they say. And I think the fact that when Minister Lavrov said everybody knows the Arctic was always our land. I mean, give me a break. But that's the approach. And so Tom DeWall, who I've enjoyed reading his work for several years, I'm a little surprised that you're pretty sanguine about like, hey, it's only a 5-year window, and then we can relook. The Russians are never leaving unless they're forced to leave. I mean, I wish it was like, okay, your 5 years up, pack it up. But I don't blame the Kremlin. I don't blame them at all. I blame us, the United States, for not focusing on this region and thinking about the strategic importance of the region. And we didn't invest. We haven't competed. And now we're paying the price, and the innocent people of Azerbaijan and Armenia and Georgia are paying the price also.
I don't want to be, I don't know, theoretical, but would you say that this call of Mr. Sullivan, both to President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan, could be a signal that the U.S. is trying to reboot the policy towards the South Caucasus region? Because in Georgia, I don't know about Armenia and Azerbaijan, but in Georgia, we need this to happen.
Well, Mao Zedong said that people vote with their feet, and in Washington, people vote with their time. And so the fact that Mr. Sullivan reached out to the leadership in both Azerbaijan and Armenia is a positive thing. I mean, there's a million other problems going on, but the fact that Mr. Sullivan did in fact reach out is positive. But let's see. The South Caucasus are part of the Black Sea region, and the administration has got to come up with a strategy for the region, which means that the administration has got to figure out its relationship with the Kremlin. Right now, I'm a little worried, but you figure out the relationship with the Kremlin, and then you figure out how we're going to compete in the Black Sea region, working with allies and with partners.
Thanks a lot. Thank you to all our guests and speakers. It was a very interesting discussion, I think important. And what I've heard from both our distinguished guests from Armenia and Azerbaijan is that we're not very expecting some hot military activities, and I hope it won't be like this. And I hope that South Caucasus will live in peace finally, maybe soon. Better sooner than later. Thank you, and have a good evening.
Thank you.